I've chosen to make a presentation of assignment B, which is the assignment called Happy Birthday, Have Some Racism from Elmwood Cafe. And the story is written by the American comedian. I'm sorry for my pronunciation, but his name is W. Kamau Bell, and he wrote this non-fictional fiction text on his blog in 2015, where he is commenting on his experience with racism at a local cafe in California. So his story is about it's his birthday, and him and his wife, who is an interracial couple, which is quite relevant for the story later on. They go to a cafe for breakfast, and it's a cafe where his wife comes a lot, and she really likes the place, so they know her there. Where after they have ate breakfast, they split up, and the man, sort of out of generosity, goes to another place because he knows that this cafe that they eat breakfast at has very limited space, and he would like to allow other people to come in there and eat. So he goes to another place, and his wife stays there to meet up with some of her friends. And later on, he returns to his wife and her group of friends, and he introduces himself, and as he is chatting with these women, he hears a knock through the glass window. They're outside, and a couple of seconds later, an employee from the cafe that he just ate breakfast at comes out and tells him to leave, and tells him to leave the group of women alone. And the employee immediately screams at him when he isn't moving, and he sort of this story that he has now that he has published on his blog. He sort of he's furious that the employee didn't apologize properly to him when he found out that he had made a mistake, and then the sort of vague apology and the lack of human decency that the employee showed Bell has sort of led him to write this text that he posted. Afterwards, after the incident at the cafe, he decided to post a picture of himself onto the cafe's Facebook page in the hope that the cafe realizes what a huge mistake, an inhumane mistake actually, that they made, and he sort of encourages to a public conversation about the ongoing racism in America. So a little bit about the sender and receiver and what effect it has. So the sender of the text is obviously Beale, who uploaded his personal experience to his blog and also posted this picture onto Facebook. And this means that the receiver are the people who either live in the same area as him and know him personally, or people who read his blog and are a fan of him. He is a known comedian, which also emphasizes in the text. So it means that everyone who has access to the internet can now access his story, and thereby he reaches thousands of people, millions of people with this story, and it can, by creating or by posting a story onto the internet, it can create this sort of chain reaction, because the subject of the story is a delicate and controversial subject, which is racism in this case, and everyone wants to sort of read it or have an opinion on it, and this can create a lot of discussions, and therefore is quite a good place, especially in this day and age, to post something if you want a immediate reaction from someone, and if you want to spark a conversation. Um, then something about the language, the genre, and the use of pathos. So, as mentioned, the story is a letter, but it's an open letter that is his own or Bell's own experience. But it is also a letter that is uploaded to his private blog and is from his point of view, so it needs some sort of um, read through with a sort of a certain criticism, because um, you can sort of compare it to reading a journal or diary, and because you can't assume that the happenings in the story are completely true, because the writer is subjective towards his own opinion in this episode, and he wants to make himself look in quotation marks good, or make him the victim in this case. Um, and he is also um, saying that he sort of in the end he emphasizes that um, that this whole story was co-written by his wife, because he is aware that people might think that he had bent the story, and nobody knows if he has, and that's sort of the issue with this type of communication or posting. So he makes sure that he writes that his wife, who's a white woman, has co-written the story, um, because he definitely felt prejudiced, and other people. He wants to make sure that he tells that other people were there and saw it too. So it's not only from his perspective, because he is a black man, that could be interpreted wrongly if he starts speaking out about racism. Um, so in his depiction of the story, he sort of wants the reader to feel empathy and pity with him, because his argumentation are loaded with pathos reasoning, such as, for example, the quote is selling something in quotation marks enough for you to bargain me through a glass window, which is on page 10. And this quote illustrates how he wants the reader to really just see how unfair the employee's treatment of him was, and also the use of adjectives and emotional words throughout the entire story creates this victimized picture of him as a character, and it also supports it's also supposed to leave the reader with sort of this aching heart and a sort of anger against racism. Again, not that it's a new thing, but just to sort of yeah, this anger. Um, Also, an interesting thing that throughout the text, Bill Beale uses a lot of capital letters. For example, he writes grit and twice a day and absolutely. Can you believe that? And this sort of creates this screaming effect whenever you write in these big capital letters. Um, and he does this because he wants to make his point clear, and also have the emotion that he feels in this scenario um, make be clear as well. And it's actually a quite good tool to use if and um, it is allowed in this case because it is a blog, so he can use these sort of different ways of writing. Um, although saying all these positive things, there is the fact that his argumentation does not have specific backings from either logic nor academic reasoning, um, which of course is allowed when it is a blog post, but it doesn't make his argumentation seem too strong in the real world. Um, and some might even find his style of writing sort of childish and semi-annoying because he is so caught up in the feeling and emotions, um, and he isn't really looking at it from a different perspective than his own. And he's constantly saying, I feel, I see, and then it sort of loses its validity, and in some way the text almost become meaningless because it's only sort of feelings upon feelings upon feelings and emotions. And if and the really relevant thing he wants to say with this text is awareness about racism, but he makes it so personal that it, as I said, almost become meaningless. Then just a short characterization of the narrator. So first person narrator, and he we know sort of only the bare necessities of him as a person. He's a self-employed black comedian. He has 2 daughters and a wife, and he mentions he's a part of all of these human rights groups, which indicates that he's a passionate human rights activist, and this may also have something to do why he is so emotional throughout the text, and he 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 sees himself as being a comedian who has a voice to eliminate racial injustice. Yes. We also know how he himself feels unfairly treated, which, for example, is presented in a quote that says, "You clearly didn't know how I was. You don't. I don't blame you. Who I was. I don't blame you for that, for not knowing me. I thought you might reach out to me, but you haven't," which is on page 11. He takes it very personal that someone is acting inhumane towards him. But some of this, he mentioned that he makes jokes about hot topics to sort of cope with them and to make them accessible to other people. But when the tables turn and he's the one who's being victimized, he doesn't use humor at all, and he sort of it's sort of a paradox because he says that he uses humor to fight tough sort of topics, but then when he's facing a tough subject, he doesn't use humor at all. It could be because the humor could sort of stand in the way of the seriousness, you know what I mean, of the story. So instead of using humor, he just uses emotion so people understand the core of the text. And then just a short thing about American values. One of the fundamental American values is equality, and it sort of says that everyone should be treated equally, and this core value is not being respected by the cafe employees because suddenly a black man is beneath this white, presumably, employee at the cafe. And the employee judges Beale directly based on his skin color. And this is also something that is in the American value that you should only judge people by their position and nothing else, which sort of contradicts with the fact that he is now being judged by his skin color. Um, and also, individualism is a big part of the American values. And then again, here, the racism sort of interferes with the American value again. Not to say that America and racism doesn't or aren't connected, because they definitely are in this day and age, but it's just interesting to look at what is the American values and how are Black people being treated in America. Yes.